Hello and welcome to the Stat Show. Stat Shows, apps, this is what it is to be alive, I tell you that for nothing. Absolutely made up to be doing this. You know the drill by now. We get loads of help from the excellent stats bomb, and as ever, James York there has been terrific in preparation for this. The mistakes are mine, they are most definitely not his. Huddersfield's the sort of game which it's difficult to build much out of. You're not going to play a side like that very often. Not just how poor they were, but how they were approaching that match. They had one eye on next season in their own preparations, but there were one or two things we can look at for the Reds. Let's start with the selection. Let's start with Daniel Sturridge. Now, if you look on the pass map, Daniel's not as involved as he'd like, as we'd like. But what's interesting is where he does his business. He does it really rather deep, deeper than you'd think a penalty box striker like him would like, although I do think he likes to get involved a bit more than he's given credit for. But is it him searching or is it instruction? And I think it's instruction. That's the slide there for Huddersfield. If we now look forward and look further back and look at the slide for Cardiff, we get to see where Firmino was for the Cardiff game. And again, after that match, Klopp said that Liverpool were looking to play a little bit of a diamond, and there is something going on there. Firmino is deeper than he normally is in that involvement. Mane is pushed on a great deal and is perhaps a little bit more central than where you'd expect as well. Salah's about the same as to what you'd think. So what's this change about? Have these two changes been game specific? It's interesting to me he's done them back to back. Is it with an eye on Barcelona? Is it with an eye on throwing a Mickey Finn towards Barcelona and saying we might be doing this because if I can see it, trust me, their analysts can? Is it with an eye possibly on Firmino not being available against Barcelona, as Rob Gutman discussed on our free show? Could it be about next season, Liverpool thinking about recruitment, thinking about options around that? It could be that as well. It's fine margins, given how Firmino tends to play in any case, but it's worth thinking about. And remember, this show is not really about answers. It's about finding more and more interesting questions. This most definitely is one to think about. What has brought this change in Klopp about? Why is he making these decisions, and what's the thought process behind it? We may find out across the next couple of games, especially in those European ones. But there's something else here as well, if you look through that shape of that midfield. Let's go back to Huddersfield. Something to spot in that Huddersfield pass map is how much more Liverpool are playing through Keita and Henderson rather than Wijnaldum. The traditional way in which number sixes are used is that everything goes through them and they go from there. Let's go back. We don't have to go very far at all. Fabinho against Chelsea. If we go back to that one, we get to see that how important he was there within there. And you can look at that one there. He doesn't feature against Cardiff. He comes on and gets the concussion and disappears again. If you look at the Cardiff one, again, the three of them are about equal in the middle of the park in terms of involvement, in terms of how sort of wide that circle is and what it is that they've been doing. But if we go again back to Huddersfield, we can see that Wijnaldum is the least involved. And we can see that from the combinations as well. It's the first time we pulled a table like this together. But if you look at the first table, it's Chelsea, the top 11 passing combinations from the Chelsea game. And in there you see Fabinho's name 4 times. What you'd expect from Liverpool's number 6, what you'd expect in there normally, you know, there's a lot of Van Dijk and Matip. They are, of course, getting on the ball more than anybody else on the pitch. That's how this tends to happen. And they tend to build from there. Let's go and look at the top 11 combinations from Cardiff. No sign whatsoever of Wijnaldum in there when he was playing in that number 6 role with Henderson ahead of him. Did they sit on him? Was it some sort of Liverpool playing past him tactical decision? Is it a tactical decision that's made during the game, or is it one that's made prior to the game that Liverpool aren't going to do that sort of thing? Let's look at the third one, Huddersfield Town. And again, it's fascinating that Liverpool's defenders are shuttling the ball to Henderson and Keita ahead of Wijnaldum. There's one mention of Wijnaldum there, you can see it, compared to 2 prominent for Naby Keita and 4 for Jordan Henderson. There's no answers here, really. Again, I'm not about the answers. Sometimes games go that way. Sometimes that's the way in which it plays out. But could these two things be linked? Could the idea of having one more slightly deeper drop in midfielder, whether it's Sturridge or Firmino playing that role, mean there's another player for opposition midfields / defenders to worry about? Mean it's easier to play directly through to Keita and Henderson? Is this a profound tactical shift, or is it something the manager just looked at for a couple of games? Is it an accident? It really could just be. We may just be over-egging this one, but it's definitely worth keeping an eye on. We have a lovely big chat about Naby Keita. We were all ridiculously excited about Naby, and in the last month he's definitely been making clear why we were right to be ridiculously excited about him. He scores the opener. It's a wonderful press and trap from Liverpool, and if you haven't read the Ken Ailey stuff that everyone on the Anfield Wrap and every show on the Anfield Wrap is going to tell you to read, do read it. Stop what you're doing right now. Come off the app, come off the Stat Show, and you go and find it on the Irish Times. It is a brilliant bit of football writing. It's a beautifully argued piece, and he uses in the outset Naby Keita's goal against Huddersfield. Can we show him coming into his own using the stats bomb data? I very much think we can. It was a low pressing affair, Liverpool versus Huddersfield, given how the game went. That does not come as a surprise. But Naby Keita brought the most pressures and the most gegen presses from any Liverpool player in the match. The eye suggested that was the case at the time. Here's his pressure map. You can see how busy he was. It's 28 pressures in totals. There's 8 gegen presses in there. Don't worry too much about what's going on with the specific dots. You can see them all right the way across the board. But there's loads and loads of bits and pieces down his side of the pitch. Where it gets interesting is a table of the pressures and gegen pressing from him in his starts. So here's another one of our new tables that we're putting out for you. The ones we've marked specifically in there are the ones where he was the highest in the category. So not just of these high numbers, but that he was outperforming the rest of his Liverpool teammates. Chelsea stands out as one where he's got very high numbers, but he isn't the busiest. Everyone else was aggressive that day. And it is also worth remembering that he went off as a sub relatively early in the match. Something else that StatsBomb gives us is the ability to look at midfielder radars. So I'm going to explain a midfielder radar to you. So here's Naby Keita's midfielder radar from the 12th of August until the 9th of February. Should be up on the screen now. So let me just explain what everything means in a clockwise manner. At 12 o'clock, you've got passing percentage of passes attempted that were completed. Then you've got deep progressions, then XG assisted, then the XG build-up, deep progressions are passes, dribbles and carries into the opposition final third per 90 minutes. XG assisted is the amount of XG assisted per 90 minutes. XG build-up is the possessions a player was involved in outside the shots and assists, something that StatsBomb tries to tell the story of, the way players are involved in things that go on to equal goals. Successful dribbles is how often a player successfully dribbles past a man trying to tackle him per 90 minutes. Fouls won is the next one, how many times a player is fouled per 90 minutes. The turnovers, how often a player loses a ball via a miscontrol or a failed dribble across 90 minutes. Pressure regains, the time a player's team wins the ball back within 5 seconds of the player pressuring an opponent per 90 minutes. There's pressures, the number of times a player pressures an opposing player across the 90 minutes. Then we've got possession adjusted tackles, and that's the idea of that adjusted across the 90 minutes in terms of how many tackles happen, but how often we have the ball as Liverpool. It's different because we have the ball more than our opponents almost every time we play the game. And the same thing for interceptions, possession adjusted interceptions per 90 minutes. So that's Naby, if you look at that shape there, that's his statistically managed performance for each of them so far across the period of time from the 12th of August, the first game of the season, right the way through until the 9th of February. Let's look since Southampton away. And you get to see straight away there as we just flick between the two, you get to see there are noticeable improvements in his passing, his tackling, his pressing and his XG build-up. It's interesting that actually his dribbling has dropped off a little bit, which would suggest he's possibly trying to dribble a little bit less, maybe finding himself on the ball in different areas of the pitch. Now let's look at these two slides, these two graphics side to side in there. In the red is Naby Keita in this April period, and it's a marked, measured improvement. And what isn't on there either is the addition of 3 goals, which obviously will be spiking massively in these sorts of areas. Let's also look at him now against the league average in the last month. Again, he's in red, and you can see again there, that is spectacular performance. It's elite performance. The turnovers is really interesting. We'll come on to that in a minute, but every other metric that you're looking for there, really, Naby Keita is substantially better if you compare him to the league average midfielder. And let's remember that some of that stuff is adjusted for the way in which Liverpool have possession. It is terrific. The turnovers is interesting because there's another metric which we can do. That's the midfielder radar we've been looking at. If we flit over now, and it's just for a quick look, I'm not going to blast you with another glossary of terms, but if you look at the attacking midfielder / winger radar, you get to see Keita in red there against the average. And the turnovers are at about 9 o'clock, and he's strong in comparison to those players, and that's where we want to see him. Do we see him as a midfielder or attacking midfielder? Well, the truth of the matter is the player we thought we were buying was both. The player we've seen in the last month is both. That is the point. He's becoming a two-way midfielder, which is what he was profiled as for Liverpool before his arrival. So if you look at that little there, if you look at this one and keep your eye on it, the one I'd love to see is at 2 o'clock. That's where we need to see a big improvement. That's touches in the box. And I think if his touches in the box improves, gets closer to that league average for attacking midfielders / wingers, then I think a lot of the other things on this radar where he's fallen behind will come. And simultaneously, we've got all the stuff he's doing as a normal midfielder, as a week in, week out midfielder. Regardless, though, you can see the journey he's already been on across this last month. We can see that he is that two-way midfielder we really hoped we were getting when he was at Leipzig and at Salzburg. He's closer and closer to the player who we saw the YouTube compilations of, we talked about the stats of, and trust me, I think there's a hell of a lot more to come from him. Thanks for watching.